licensed suspension hearing officer who clerked the morning docket of Administrative Courtroom 2, a calm, methodical woman named Antonella Russo, who had recorded the morning's tickets and tags and reinstatements for the state administrative bench for 16 years, and who had in those years watched a great many 70-year-old citizens shuffle to the rail clutching a manila folder, could tell, by the way the trooper sergeant sat down at the state's table that Wednesday morning, that he was about to lie. She had not, in 16 years, ever been wrong about that small private signal. The trooper sergeant adjusted his uniform collar twice in the first 30 seconds. He laid his blue field log on the table with the cover open instead of closed. He did not look once at the 71-year-old woman across the room. He did exactly once look at the open courtroom window, the way a man looks at a window when he has just realized the open courtroom window is, by happenstance, looking out on the street where the entire matter at issue had occurred, and where the photograph he was about to introduce into evidence might, under a sufficiently careful question, be tested against the actual geography of the street. The 71-year-old woman across the room was Mrs. Imelda Brians. She had been a registered pediatric nurse for 46 years before retiring in 2022. She had served in those 46 years in 3 different hospitals and 2 community clinics on the south side of the city, and had a small notebook in her purse in which she had written down, by hand, the name of every child she had ever assisted in the delivery room. The notebook had been a gift from her husband, the late Vicent Brians, on the morning of her first hospital shift in 1978. She still carried it. She had, that Wednesday morning, also brought her manila folder, her purse, her small worn brown handbag, and her 20-year-old grandson Mateo, a rising junior at a state engineering school who had driven her downtown that morning in the same green sedan. She was here, now, in danger of losing the right to drive. The license suspension complaint had been filed 5 weeks earlier. The state trooper sergeant, a 38-year-old named Sergeant Drennan, 14 years on the road, on the cusp of a quiet promotion to lieutenant, had sworn on the official department form that on the morning of the recent state holiday at 10:45 a.m., he had personally observed Mrs. Brians driving 47 miles per hour in a posted 25-mile-per-hour school zone on Sycamore Avenue between Brigham and Calderon Streets, with school children visibly present in the marked crosswalk, that she had failed to stop or yield to pedestrian crossing signals, and that based on her age and on his roadside observation of her general orientation, he had concluded that she was a danger to public safety and was filing for an administrative license suspension under the elderly driver safety provision of the state vehicle code. The complaint, signed under penalty of perjury, had triggered an immediate 90-day administrative suspension pending hearing. Mrs. Brians had, in the 5 weeks since, not driven. She had walked when she could. She had asked her grandson for rides when she could not. She had taken a city bus twice. She had missed 2 long-standing weekly appointments because the bus did not, on its current schedule, run to either of them. She had also, the morning the suspension letter had arrived, very carefully laid out on her kitchen table everything she could think of that could speak in her own defense. Her insurance record, clean for 53 years, her medical history which she had requested from her own primary care physician, her vision screening from her last Department of Motor Vehicles renewal 15 months earlier which she had passed. Her grandson Mateo had, on the second day, asked her a single question. He had asked her whether, on the holiday morning in question, the green sedan had been outfitted with the small forward-facing dashcam he had installed in it for her as a birthday gift in the spring of 2023. She had thought about it for a moment. She had said simply, "Yes, of course. You installed it. I have not in 2 years turned it off." The dashcam, by Mateo's careful inspection that same evening, had recorded a continuous 4-minute 38-second clip of the holiday morning drive. The clip had a small time stamp burned into the lower left corner. The time stamp read, "At the moment Mrs. Brians's green sedan passed the corner of Brigham and Sycamore Avenue, 10:43 a.m." The clip continued through the next 4 minutes. It showed, with the cool, unblinking eye that dashcams have, the entire holiday morning streetscape of Sycamore Avenue between Brigham and Calderon. It showed an empty street. It showed no school children. It showed no marked crosswalk activated in any way. It showed the speedometer of the green sedan, visible on the lower right of the dashcam frame because Mateo had installed the camera in such a way that it caught both the front view and a small reflected sliver of the dashboard. The speedometer showed, for the entire duration of the clip, between 22 and 24 miles per hour. At no point in any of the 4 minutes 38 seconds did it exceed 25. The clip also showed, when Mateo had patiently zoomed in on it for himself that evening, two further things that had not been on Sergeant Drennan's sworn complaint. First, the school zone on Sycamore Avenue between Brigham and Calderon was a school zone for the public elementary school that occupied the building between those streets. The school had been on the morning in question closed. The state holiday was a state holiday. The school had been closed for the holiday. The marked crosswalks had not on the holiday been activated. The pedestrian signal cabinets had been turned to the holiday setting. There had been no children on the marked crosswalk because there had been no school. Second, the dashcam captured, at the corner of Sycamore and Calderon, a clear view of the state trooper cruiser that had Sergeant Drennan's affidavit confirmed been parked at the intersection observing Mrs. Briand's. The cruiser was visible in the dashcam frame for exactly 2.5 seconds as Mrs. Briand's drove past. In the 2.5 seconds, the cruiser's driver's side door was open. The trooper inside the cruiser was clearly visible. He was not looking at the road. He was looking with both hands at a phone in his lap. Mateo, that same evening, had also done one more thing. He had pulled up the city's publicly available traffic engineering map of the school zone in question on his laptop. The map confirmed that the marked crosswalks at the corner of Brigham and Sycamore and at the corner of Calderon and Sycamore were controlled by the city's adaptive signal system. The adaptive signal system was, on every official state holiday on which the public school was closed, set to its holiday configuration. The holiday configuration was, by official posted city policy, 25 miles per hour without active school zone modification. The holiday configuration was also, by the same official posted policy, automatically logged in the city's traffic control data archive every 15 seconds. The archive entry for 10:43 a.m. on the holiday in question, which Mateo had downloaded from the city's open data portal, confirmed the 25-mile-per-hour holiday configuration. Mrs. Briand's had taken all of this, the dashcam clip on a small flash drive, a printed photograph of the cruiser's open door and the trooper looking at his phone, a printed copy of the city's traffic engineering map of the school zone, and a printed copy of the city's adaptive signal system archive entry from 10:43 a.m. on the holiday, and placed them carefully in her manila folder. She had labeled the folder in her own careful nursing handwriting in plain blue ink, Evidence, License Hearing Sycamore. She had brought the folder that Wednesday morning to Administrative Courtroom 2. Her grandson Mateo sat in the back row in a plain dark sweater and a pair of jeans because he did not in his short 20 years own a suit. He had taken 3 days off from a summer internship at a regional power utility to be in the courtroom. Antonella Russo, the hearing officer, had noticed him at the door and had nodded once, gently, in the way a hearing officer's nod can be all the welcome a young man who has not been in a courtroom before needs. Mateo had nodded back. The judge that Wednesday morning was Judge Alina Hartwell. She was 62. She had served on the administrative bench for 9 years, and had been before that, for 15 years a staff attorney at a regional legal aid foundation that specialized in elderly driver licensing matters. She had personally represented in her legal aid years several hundred 70- and 80-year-olds whose licenses had been challenged on the basis of a single trooper's sworn observation. She had, in her 9 years on the bench, developed a particular reputation. She listened in administrative license cases very carefully to the trooper. She listened just as carefully to the citizen. She did not ever raise her voice. She had, by her own quiet count, reinstated 73% of the licenses that had come before her on contested administrative suspensions. She had also, by her own quiet count, sustained the suspensions in the remainder. She decided each case on the record. The record in her courtroom was what the record was. This is the matter of the Department of Motor Vehicles versus Imelda Briand's, Judge Hartwell said. We are here on the petitioner's challenge to the 90-day administrative suspension. The state is represented by Sergeant Drennan, who has elected to appear as the affiant. The petitioner is represented by Ms. Lima. Ms. Lima, a young legal aid attorney whose name was Itzel Lima, and who had received Mrs. Briand's file 3 weeks before the hearing, stood and nodded. She was 29. She had been admitted to the bar for 3 years. She had, until 2 days before the hearing, been planning to introduce the dashcam clip as her 7th exhibit. She had, after a careful late-evening conversation with the senior attorney at the legal aid office, decided to introduce it second. Sergeant Drennan, Judge Hartwell said, please rise and walk through for the record the substance of your affidavit. Sergeant Drennan rose. He walked through the affidavit. He read aloud in a careful, steady voice the substance of every paragraph he had signed under penalty of perjury 5 weeks before. He described the holiday morning. He described the school zone on Sycamore. He described Mrs. Brianza's green sedan crossing the intersection of Brigham and Sycamore at 47 miles per hour. He described the school children he had personally observed in the marked crosswalk. He described his conclusion regarding Mrs. Brianza's competence to operate a motor vehicle. He sat. Sergeant, Judge Hartwell said, 2 clarifying questions. First, are you absolutely certain that the school zone was active on the morning in question? I am, Your Honor. Second, are you absolutely certain that the children you observed in the marked crosswalk were children and were on the marked crosswalk at the time Mrs. Brianza's vehicle entered the school zone? I am, Your Honor. Thank you, Sergeant. Ms. Lima, your case. Itzel Lima rose. She walked through Mrs. Brianza's first exhibit, which was her insurance record. Sergeant Drennan at the state's table did not object. Judge Hartwell entered the exhibit. Itzel Lima nodded to Mateo at the back of the courtroom. Mateo stood up, walked to the front of the courtroom, and quietly handed his grandmother's small flash drive to Itzel Lima. Your Honor, Itzel said, the petitioner moves to enter as Petitioner's Exhibit 2 a continuous 4-minute 38-second video file recorded by a dashcam mounted in the petitioner's vehicle on the morning of the holiday in question, with embedded timestamp and embedded speedometer reflection. The dashcam was installed by the petitioner's grandson, who is present in the courtroom this morning, and is available to authenticate the installation date and the device's operation. The file has not been modified. The petitioner further moves to enter as Petitioner's Exhibit 3 a printed copy of the city traffic engineering map of the relevant school zone, and as Petitioner's Exhibit 4 a printed copy of the city adaptive signal system archive entry from 10:43 a.m. on the holiday in question. Sergeant Drennan at the state's table said, Your Honor, the state objects. The petitioner has not laid an adequate foundation for the device or the recording. Judge Hartwell said, Mr. Brianz. Mateo Brianz at the rail stood very straight. He said, Your Honor, my name is Mateo Brianz. I installed the dashcam in my grandmother's vehicle in the spring of 2023 as a birthday gift. The model is a continuous loop unit with embedded GPS, embedded timestamp, and a recording cycle of 48 hours before the oldest data is overwritten. The data from the holiday morning is preserved because I copied it off the device the same evening of the holiday and stored it on a separate hard drive in my dorm room. The file has not been modified. I am willing to swear to the chain of custody. Judge Hartwell nodded. Madam Clerk, please swear in Mr. Brianz. Antonella Russo administered the oath. Mateo Brianz swore to it. He stepped down. The objection is overruled, Judge Hartwell said. The exhibits are admitted. Ms. Lima, you may play Exhibit 2. Itzel Lima plugged the flash drive into the courtroom's overhead display system. She pressed play. What the courtroom saw on the overhead display was a continuous 4-minute 38-second clip of the holiday morning drive on Sycamore Avenue between Brigham and Calderon. The clip had a small timestamp burned into the lower left corner. At the moment Mrs. Brianza's green sedan passed the corner of Brigham and Sycamore, the timestamp read 10:43 a.m. The clip showed an empty street. It showed no school children. It showed no marked crosswalk activated in any way. It showed the speedometer of the green sedan steady between 22 and 24 miles per hour. It did not, in any of the 4 minutes 38 seconds, exceed 25. It also showed at the corner of Sycamore and Calderon 2.5 seconds of clear view of the parked state trooper cruiser. The cruiser's driver's side door was open. The trooper inside was clearly visible. He was looking at a phone in his lap. It was, in Antonella Russo's 16 years of clerking the morning docket of Administrative Courtroom 2, the longest silence she had ever heard in the room. Judge Hartwell let the silence sit for one short careful second, then she lifted her pen. Sergeant Drennan, she said, please rise. Sergeant Drennan rose. He had by then lost something in his face. Sergeant Drennan, Judge Hartwell said, I am going to ask you 2 questions. I am going to ask them once, on the record, under the oath you took at the beginning of these proceedings. Yes, Your Honor. Sergeant, did you, on the morning of the holiday in question, personally observe Mrs. Imelda Brianz operating her vehicle at 47 miles per hour through an active school zone with children present in the marked crosswalk? Yes or no? There was a pause that was, Antonella Russo would say later, the kind of pause that did not need to be longer than it was. Sergeant Drennan said, No, Your Honor. Sergeant, did you, at the time of the encounter at the corner of Sycamore and Calderon, have your driver's side door open and your eyes on your personal phone? There was no pause this time. Sergeant Drennan said, "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Hartwell did not raise her voice. She did not allow herself a long pause. She lifted her pen and spoke evenly. "On the record before the court," she said, "the court has heard sworn testimony from the affiant directly contradicting his own signed affidavit of 5 weeks ago. The court has further seen, in a continuous 4-minute 38-second time-stamped video record of the holiday morning in question, evidence that conclusively contradicts the substance of the affidavit. The court has further seen, in the city's own traffic engineering map and adaptive signal system archive, evidence that the school zone was not active on the morning at issue. The court finds on this record that the administrative suspension against Mrs. Imelda Brians was issued without basis in fact." She turned the page. "The administrative suspension is lifted in full, effective immediately. Mrs. Brians's driver's license is reinstated. The Department of Motor Vehicles will, by the close of business today, issue a corrected record. The court further orders the department to refer this matter by separate written order to the State Trooper's Office of Internal Affairs for review of Sergeant Drennan's sworn affidavit under the relevant administrative perjury and dereliction of duty statutes. The court further orders the matter referred to the Trooper Officer Professional Standards Committee for review of any pattern of similar elderly driver safety affidavits Sergeant Drennan has filed in the preceding 2 years. Sergeant Drennan, you are not at this proceeding charged with any criminal offense. The referrals are administrative and professional. They will proceed as they proceed. Your supervisor will be informed of this ruling by the close of business today. Madam Clerk." Antonella Russo nodded, "Yes, Your Honor." "Thank you, Madam Clerk." The court further wishes to commend, on the record, Mr. Mateo Brians for his careful and thorough preparation, the city of this jurisdiction for its open data portal, which made the Adaptive Signal System archive available to the petitioner, and Ms. Lima of the Legal Aid Office for her quiet and competent representation. The court particularly wishes to thank Mrs. Brians for her patience over the 5 weeks of this matter and for the careful manila folder she has, this morning, brought to this courtroom. Mrs. Brians, you may stand." Mrs. Imelda Brians stood. She did not weep. She did not say anything. She nodded once to Judge Hartwell. She turned and looked at Mateo at the rail. Mateo did not say anything either. He smiled at her. She smiled back. "Mrs. Brians," Judge Hartwell said, "I will not detain you. The court owes you on the record an apology for the inconvenience of the last 5 weeks. The court extends that apology now. You may drive home this afternoon. Please drive carefully." Mrs. Brians nodded one more time. "I will, Your Honor, thank you." She turned. She walked on her grandson's arm, the careful, steady walk of a 71-year-old retired pediatric nurse who had been told, in a brief and lawful manner, that the record had heard her. They walked together past the rail, past Antonella Russo at the docket desk, past the back row where Mateo had sat that morning, and out through the open courtroom door. Sergeant Drennan, at the state's table, did not look up. Within the hour, the Department of Motor Vehicles had been served with the reinstatement order. By the close of business that afternoon, the Trooper's Internal Affairs Office had been served with the court's referral. By the next morning, Sergeant Drennan had been placed, pending review, on administrative duty at the troop barracks. By the end of the following week, the Trooper Officer Professional Standards Committee's preliminary review of his elderly driver safety affidavits over the preceding 2 years had identified 11 other affidavits filed by Sergeant Drennan against drivers between the ages of 67 and 83. Each of those affidavits had relied on the same single-officer observational template Sergeant Drennan had used against Mrs. Brians. By the end of the month, 8 of the 11 prior administrative suspensions Sergeant Drennan had sworn into being had been reopened by the court on the bench's own motion. Itzel Lima at the Legal Aid Office, having become the de facto specialist on the matter, would carry 7 of those 8 cases on contingency. By the end of the year, 6 of the 7 prior suspensions would be lifted. Sergeant Drennan would, by the end of the year, accept a written reprimand and a 1-grade demotion. He would not be charged criminally. He would, in the following spring, retire from the state trooper's service at the rank to which he had been demoted. He would by then have written, in his own careful hand, a letter to each of the 7 drivers whose prior suspensions had been lifted. The letters would not include an apology because the Trooper Officer Professional Standards Committee's terms had not required one. They would include only an acknowledgement that the prior affidavits had not, in each case, been supported by sufficient observation. Itzel Lima would forward each letter to the addressee through proper channels. The addressees would do with them what the addressees chose. In the corridor of Administrative Courtroom 2 that Wednesday afternoon, after the docket had cleared, Antonella Russo walked her usual slow route back to the docket office. She passed the open door of Courtroom 2. The bench was clean and empty. The flag stood where it had stood for as long as the building had been a building. She thought for one short second about Mrs. Imelda Brianza's small, careful notebook of every child she had ever assisted in the delivery room. She thought about Matteo Brianza's 3 days off from his summer internship. She thought about the city's open data portal, which she had not, until that morning, ever heard of, and which had quietly carried in its careful archives the 8-second time-stamp that had ended the matter. She thought about Judge Hartwell, who had, in 9 years on the bench, never raised her voice. She thought about the record. The record, in the end, was what the record was. The record that Wednesday morning had been complete. She turned off the corridor light. She walked back to the docket office. The building, in its quiet and lawful way, was waiting. On the long drive home, Mrs. Imelda Brianza drove the green sedan herself, at exactly 23 miles per hour through the holiday-quiet streets of the South Side, with her grandson Matteo in the passenger seat and the small worn brown handbag in her lap. She did not on the drive home speak much. She did at the corner of Brigham and Sycamore Avenue slow further to careful 21. She looked briefly at the closed elementary school. She looked briefly at the marked crosswalk. She looked briefly at the corner of Sycamore and Calderon. Then she drove on. The dashcam, still running, recorded the holiday-quiet street, the careful holiday-quiet way it had recorded everything in the 2 years since Matteo had installed it. When she pulled into her own driveway, 28 minutes later, she did not turn the dashcam off. She had not, in 2 years, ever turned it off. She had no intention now of ever turning it off again. Matteo walked her to her front door. He kissed her on the cheek. He said very quietly, "Abuela, you did good." Mrs. Brianza said, "We did good." She unlocked the door. She went inside. She set the manila folder on the kitchen table. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time and looked at the folder. Then she opened it. She took out the printed photograph of the trooper looking at his phone. She did not look at it long. She set it back in the folder. She closed the folder. She finished her tea. She washed the cup. She went to bed. In the morning she came down and made her breakfast and got dressed and drove herself, at exactly 23 miles per hour through the morning streets of the South Side, to her weekly volunteer shift at the community clinic on Bassett Street, where every Thursday for the last 3 years of her retirement she had been reading children's storybooks to the toddlers in the waiting room. The dashcam ran. The streets behaved. The record, as the record always did when it was complete, kept itself.